Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to our Dry Creek Vineyard virtual tasting. Hi, Miss Stephanie. I was hoping you were going to join today. My name is Sarah Rathbun. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications here at Dry Creek Vineyard, and I am very excited about our tasting today. I'm always excited about our tastings, but this time of year is always really fun for us because we have so many new releases. The way that our clubs are set up, we have new releases in February, in April, and in May, which means we have a lot of new exciting wines to talk about and to taste, of course, which is always great. So I'm really excited for today's tasting where Tim is going to focus on 3 of the wines that we just released in February. And it's kind of an interesting array of wines that we have for tonight. So I'm really excited to hear what you guys think about it and go from there. So a couple, again, housekeeping items. I want to let you know that for the first time, we have the live transcript button down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So if it's something that it helps you to be able to see closed captions on a Zoom, please use that and let me know how it goes, if that's something that's helpful for you or not. Also, just go ahead and put your questions down in the chat, and I'll be fielding those questions and I'll be kind of peppering them in when I know where is a great spot for Tim to answer them. So don't feel discouraged if I don't get your question right away, but please ask us a lot of questions because we really do love that and it makes it just so much more fun. Well, without further ado, I am going to hand it over to our winemaker, Tim Bell, to start us off for the night.
Thank you, Sarah. Welcome, everybody. So good to see all of you. A lot of familiar faces and some new faces to me as well. So I really enjoy these and enjoy getting a chance to kind of go in a little depth on these different wines that we taste in these events. And I love to hear your questions. It's always really great to have some feedback and some inquiry into what we're doing. So anyways, as I like to do when we start these, I like to talk about what's going on in the winery right now and what's happening in the vineyards. And right today, we're in the middle of a pretty good rainstorm, which is making us feel really happy because we're actually in a drought year. We've really got less than normal rainfall happening this year. And so we really need this and hope we get more. The vineyards are really poised to just launch into bud break any second now. Some I have heard of bud break in some vineyards, but I haven't seen it in any of ours yet. But after this bit of rain, we're going to get into some warmer weather, and I can already see the buds swelling. So I know we're going to start seeing the first little shoots starting to come out of those buds and really announce here we go, another growing season. We've had some really cold nights too, and so I've heard some wind machines going, growers using frost protection in the wee hours of the morning. Again, trying to protect those tender little buds, even if they've just started to swell but aren't really growing out. A lot of times will use the frost protection just to make sure there's no damage there. And one of the things that I've really been enjoying in the last few weeks is just the flowers and the cover crop in the vineyards. There's been just this incredible explosion over the last couple of weeks of these beautiful wildflowers. And my wife kids that I'm Ferdinand the bull, if any of you remember that children's story about the bull who loved flowers. But that photo there was just one of those shots. Had some nice chamomile and some mustard, and there's some stuff in there I don't even know what it is, but it's pretty, and I really love that.
Go back in. Oh wait, where were you just now? Because I was like, maybe I shouldn't have joined with computer on.
Oh, sorry. Thought someone was talking to me. Anyhow, that's what I was talking about. And this shot here, there's a lot of purple vetch in there. And if anybody knows what that little orange flower is, let me know. I'm dying to know. I keep asking vineyard guys, and they kind of always give me this. So anyhow, there's a lot of it here in Dry Creek Valley, and it's really nice. So also what's happening is we are bottling. So today we've actually been bottling the 2019 Old Vine Zinfandel. And that's really kind of a nice tie-in to one of the wines that we're tasting tonight, our Beeson Ranch Zinfandel, because that Beeson Ranch Zinfandel is an important piece of that Old Vine blend. And in the 2019 blend, it's really one of the bigger pieces. It was a very good vintage for Beeson. But what's fun is we get to try one of those individual components of a really great vineyard. So I'm looking forward to talking about that and trying that with you. Also, our fearless leader, Kim Stair-Wallace, is off in Montana visiting her children. Probably has gotten some snow, and I think we'll be getting some more before she gets back. But things are just moving along here and continuing to go well. So with that, I think I will launch into the first of our 3 wines. And that's going to be our 2019 Chardonnay. This is we call it DCV Estate Block 10. And this is a single vineyard Chardonnay. And, before we kind of talk about the specifics of this wine, just talk a little bit about our history with Chardonnay. So we've actually been making Chardonnay since the very beginning in 1972. And Sarah found this original label, and I thought it was really cool to put that up there and show it to you. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting is if you look in the fine print on the back label, it was harvested at 23.6 degrees Brix. So Brix is our measure of sugar in grapes. And the sugar leads to how much alcohol. So more sugar, more alcohol, less sugar, less alcohol. But basically Brix is just kind of like a percentage. Basically it's a weight measure. It's a percentage of the sugar in the grape. And so 23.6, it's actually slightly higher than the 2019 that we're going to taste today. So we're still pretty much in the same range of ripeness. And this first Chardonnay, if you also can make it out on your screen, was grapes grown by Robert and Gertrude Young. So Robert Young Vineyard became very well known, has become one of the famous Chardonnay vineyards. And this is Dave with Robert Young getting his first Chardonnay crop. So Dave had tapped into a really good vineyard source right from the beginning. And later on, the winery purchased its own property in the Russian River Valley, which is just south of us, south of Dry Creek Valley. And that has become the basis of our Chardonnay that we're trying here today. And Russian River Valley has become really ground zero in Sonoma County for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. So all the 2 key varieties that are native to the Burgundy region of France. And if you look at this map, you can see this shows all of Sonoma County and the different appellations within the county. So Dry Creek Valley, we're kind of up there in the middle at the north end of Sonoma County. And Russian River Valley is immediately south of us. And Dry Creek Valley is kind of has these mountain ranges with a narrow valley going sort of sideways, not exactly north and south. But at the end, the bottom of the valley, the southern end of Dry Creek Valley, we kind of open up to a broader plain, and that really becomes the Russian River Valley. It's really kind of this broad floodplain down there below us, and it's a little bit cooler, partly because it's a little closer to the Bay Area. You see at the bottom of the map, there's some blue for the ocean. That's a very important influence on our climate because the cool air comes in from the south. And so you can imagine that Russian River Valley is a little bit cooler than Dry Creek Valley because the cold air has further to go. And then down below Russian River Valley, into the Sonoma Coast appellation is even cooler still. So all regulated by its proximity to the ocean. So our vineyard, as I said, is a Russian River Valley vineyard. And this is a great shot of it here too, showing kind of some of the morning mist or fog coming through some of the oaks. There's a few beautiful oak trees kind of right in the middle of the vineyard. And I don't really know, I wasn't there when this was planted, but I could imagine it would have been much more efficient and nice to just cut those trees down, but because they're right in the middle of the vineyard, and actually any vines growing around those trees kind of don't put out as much fruit. They're weaker vines because the trees are really competing with them for water and nutrients. But it sure is a beautiful sight. And then all around the vineyard are some other trees and increasingly houses too. So it's kind of this little oasis in the middle of northern Santa Rosa, basically. And Chardonnay, talking about what we do. So Chardonnay is really one of the wines that more than almost any other wine relies on winemaking technique. It doesn't mean you don't need good fruit. It really does make a difference. But Chardonnay is a very subtle flavored grape, and you want good acidity, you want good balance. Different clones of Chardonnay can really make a difference. But the site is very important influence, and then what you do with the winemaking. So, starting with this site, I was given the mission of really kind of blowing up and starting over on our Chardonnay program years ago. And so we started with zeroing in on the north end of the vineyard, where there's about 30 rows. It looked to me like the soil was maybe a little bit rockier, a little more well-drained. And the soil in this vineyard is kind of this sort of gray clay. And I've seen in some really great Carneros vineyards that I've worked with in the past for Chardonnay, this sort of same gray clay color. Some of those vineyards get a lot more sort of cracked soil as it dries out. Our vineyard isn't quite that extreme, but it tells you it's got some good background for Chardonnay, good soil or good dirt. We did some modification of our pruning to leave less wood or buds on the vine, so we have less shoots and get more balanced crop, kind of less leaf layers. And there is some evidence perhaps that less leaves stacking on top of each other helps you with acidity and pH. So it's a positive. And then we do whole cluster picking and pressing. So we take the whole cluster of grapes, dump it into the press, and it's a very gentle press cycle. And then we really get to start to play as a winemaker. So we always divide the juice up into 3 different lots. And one of those lots, we don't add any yeast at all. We let it go native yeast or non, some people call it wild yeast. And we don't add any yeast. We don't add any malolactic bacteria. We just let nature take its course. And the thought there is that when you get some non-Saccharomyces, to get more technical, a non-Saccharomyces species of yeast growing in your wines, perhaps you get some flavors and additional flavors and complexity that you wouldn't otherwise. But basically we have to have Saccharomyces. It's kind of the workhorse yeast that you use in making bread. It's used in beer. It's used in winemaking. It has the alcohol tolerance to bring the fermentation home and take it all the way. But some other yeasts can do some work up front and give us some additional complexity. So, a portion of that is native yeast. And this particular vintage, 2019, is 20% of native yeast and native malolactic bacteria. So then a bigger portion, somewhere around 57, 58%, we used this. It's a mixed strain yeast. So it's actually got some Saccharomyces along with some other yeast species. They're what we would call wild yeasts, but they've been cultivated and put together in sort of a designer yeast that's really made for Chardonnay. And there's some Torulaspora, some Lacanaceae. What we get with those is some additional beautiful fruity components. Their esters are the classification of those aromas in organic chemistry. And also one of those species produces more glycerol, which really gives mouthfeel and richness to the wine. Okay, so that's the second piece. And then the third piece, we use a strain of yeast. It's a Saccharomyces yeast isolated from fermentations in Burgundy. So it's really a native yeast to Burgundy, very typical performance of what Burgundy wines taste like. So white Burgundy is Chardonnay. And this yeast is we like because it can, after the fermentation, it can break down and release some of the yeast cell contents, basically some of these beautiful amino acids and manoproteins. So it adds some mouthfeel and texture and even some slightly nutty characters to the wine. So you can see already we've set ourselves up with multiple different layers of flavor and ingredients to put together in the blend. The last piece, and we've started doing in recent years, is a little bit of this wine gets fermented in stainless steel barrels. And so what that does for us, because all the rest of it's fermented in French oak, but these stainless steel drums basically don't contribute any flavor and a lot less oxygen uptake than the barrels do. And so we get a lot more bright, vibrant fruit in the wine. And so in the end, you have what's in the glass here, and I'm going to take a minute to give a taste of this. So, the goal here, and I think we've achieved it, has been to have some bright, expressive fruit. I get some nice fresh pear and melon, maybe even a little peach. Also, just a tiny hint of maybe like ginger in there as well. And then, but it's got this richness. Chardonnay is one of the biggest, richest grapes of any of the white grapes that anybody works with. So it's got this really beautiful mouth-filling texture, but it's still lively. It has some good acid, just a tiny little bit of prickle on your tongue that tells me it's going to go well with food as well, and will age nicely as well. So yeah, that's kind of the story of how we put all this wine together. I know that was a lot. I don't know if we have any questions about that one.
We just got one actually asking about why 28% new oak.
Must have been reading the stat sheet if you knew exactly what percent oak we had. So that's a good question. So I've used more new oak than that in the past on Chardonnays, but as I've matured as a winemaker, I've come to value less oak in a lot of wines, not all across the board, but often a little bit less, and really let the fruit and the vineyard speak, I think, more than the wood, and really have that oak be a flavor complement and not a major dominant sort of ingredient or component of the wine. So there's plenty of people out there that will use 30% or more new oak in Chardonnay. But we like to use some particular coopers from France that are, have pretty subtle influence on the wine. And then we use a sort of a restrained amount of new oak. So 28% just is kind of what worked for this vintage. You'll see it in different vintages being lower or higher. Probably not higher, but maybe a little lower. We've gone as low as maybe like 24, 23%. 25 is typically a nice sweet spot. So yeah, that's the story on the new oak. I hope that answers that.
Well, and then we got a question kind of spinning off of that. Will it age better or worse with less oak?
Good question. I find that typically over time, the oak flavors sort of mellow out and diminish, so they're not as strong. Whether or not oak would help it age better or make it worse, I don't think so. I haven't seen any evidence strongly in either direction. The one thing that oak can contribute is some amount of wood tannins. Grapes have naturally their own tannins, and they're a little different from what's in wood, but you can get some wood tannins there as well, which are antioxidants. So in theory, maybe there'd be some positive benefit to those helping a wine age, but I really don't think it's a major component. For me, it's more about acid and pH, and to some degree the tannins as well. That is an important component, but more the grape tannins.
Well, and speaking of flavors, we had two questions about what makes a Chardonnay buttery or gives it that creamy, buttery flavor.
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked that actually. So I meant to talk about that a little bit more. And what gives Chardonnay a buttery flavor is the malolactic fermentation. So basically after we go through the yeast fermentation, converting the sugar to alcohol, there can be a malolactic fermentation using bacteria. And it's lactic acid bacteria. They're the same bacteria that you find in yogurt and some other food products. Maybe not the exact same species, but the same family. And they convert lactic acid, which is malic acid, naturally occurring in the wine, to lactic acid. One of the things that does is a little bit of lowering of acidity. Lactic acid is less acidic, but a byproduct can be a production of something called diacetyl. It's a buttery flavored compound, and it's actually the same thing that is used like in microwave popcorn to make it smell buttery. And so, different strains of malolactic bacteria can produce different amounts of diacetyl. And we tend to use on the portion of the wine that we inoculate with malolactobacteria, we tend to use strains that don't produce a lot of diacetyl. I don't want a lot of buttery flavor in the wine. I want, more fruit focus. A little bit of that sort of butter and butterscotch quality out of the fermentation and the barrels as well is a nice complement, but I don't want it to dominate the wine.
There we go. And so another question that we have had is, how does this vintage compare to previous years?
Yeah, 2019 was a cool vintage. And even 2018 was a cooler vintage. Whereas when we go back to 2017, that was definitely a warmer vintage. We had a hot spell at the end of August, beginning of September, for 5 days. 2016 was a pretty balanced year, but I won't go through all the vintages I've ever made in my life. But basically 2018, 2019 were both cooler years. But what was kind of unique about 2019 was overall sort of bigger crop for all the grape varieties. And a lot of the wines kind of just took their time getting up to the level of sugar. And this vineyard, the DCV Block 10 vineyard, really is a little bit cool. And so it kind of almost struggles a little bit to get enough sugar where we want it. So we kind of have to let it sit out there for a little while. And 2019 was no exception. We actually picked this in October 10th. So, Sauvignon Blanc, which is an earlier ripening white, we're picking that in August, some of it in September, but, never in October. But the Chardonnay takes a little bit longer to get there, and it's a cooler region. It's not Dry Creek Valley, it's Russian River Valley, and it's just a different grape. So all those things combined. But yeah, cooler year, and when you have a cooler year, the grapes tend to hold on their natural acidity better. And so this wine has a little bit higher acidity naturally than previous vintages. And the pH is a little bit lower than has been in recent vintages as well. So those two things are kind of the byproduct of the cool year. And I think that gives it this really nice, lively, mouthfeel. Like I said, that little bit of slight acid tingle. It's not at all tart, but it's just got that little bit of hint of that. And I think that's going to set it up to age pretty nicely.
Well, speaking of aging, we had about 3 questions kind of asking, when do you anticipate this peaking, or kind of how long would you age this?
Yeah, so that, aging any wine, and in particular whites, is really kind of very much influenced by your preference, really. I tend to like whites fairly, on the younger side. This one I would definitely hold on to it for 2 or 3 more years for sure. No problem. Even 5, I would definitely enjoy it. When you start getting on beyond that, then it just kind of becomes what you like, because the fresh, beautiful fruit that you taste now is going to slowly diminish, but there's going to be some other flavors that'll take over. The color will get a little bit edging towards a little bit more darker. 5-6 years, it's not probably going to be amber. If you age it 20 years, it'll get more a little amber color, but a little bit of softening of acidity with time. And you might get some sort of more nutty, sometimes even toffee-like flavors that would develop with some age. So it's kind of that sweet spot. For me, I like, when maybe you get a little bit of that aged character, but you still got this fresh fruit hanging in there too. So yeah, so that's my window. Is I would say, maybe out to 5 years. And then, if you have a few bottles, you taste one and see if you like it. And if you think it's still great, let the other sit there for a little longer.
So you had mentioned the kind of unique yeast protocol with this particular wine that we have. And so we had a question from Paul asking, do you ever play with the blends of yeast, or is that kind of a set protocol? Or
we actually do. So we and actually I forgot about one part of our yeast protocol too. So the part that we inoculate with the Saccharomyces yeast, we actually use a pure culture, live culture of a Pichia yeast, which is another sort of native yeast that you can find in vineyards. And we actually let that go for like 5 days, 3 to 5 days. And then we add the Saccharomyces yeast after it. So it's kind of 2 different yeasts after each other. But the things we play with are, so we've used in recent years some different yeast from that Burgundy strain I've talked about, one that's a little fruitier, and we've had some good results with that. So we're always kind of doing different trials. We might do a barrel or two of this or that and see if we like something better. But then the other thing is that every year the final blend is going to be a little bit different mix of all those protocols, because we've got a number of different barrels that we have to choose from, and we may not use all of them. Some of them may get weeded out. And a lot of that just has to do with the proportions that we want of, the new oak, the second fill barrels, because the oak in those barrels that are filled for a second year still contribute a fair amount of oak. And then, the different yeast protocols and the malolactic as well. Sometimes we have some barrels or some lots that don't complete malolactic fermentation. If it tastes good, we're fine with that. We'll do it. And this wine is not 100% malolactic.
So John and Sharon had a great question. How is aging time counted? So is it 5 years from the vintage date or 5 years from when it's released?
Yeah, I always go by the vintage date, because, unless you've kept careful records, there's no way for you to remember when the wine was released. And it's not going to be on the label or anything like that. So yeah, that's how I do it. And I think that's how most people do it, but that's what I do.
Perfect. And so we had one question. You were talking about how we harvested this in October. And so somebody brought up, how have the wildfires affected the grapes then?
Well, so I'm not sure exactly what you mean, but if you mean like in 2019 vintage in particular, there were some fires sort of over more around Alexander Valley, which is kind of east of us. And trying to remember, I'm pretty sure they happened like near, later in October, I think.
Yeah, 2019 was the Halloween fires.
Yeah, so everything was harvested. So the only effect that any fires around have on the grapes is if the grapes are still on the vine, and if the smoke is in close enough proximity, spends enough time. It's a very sort of complex equation. We have a lot to learn about that, but basically 2019, we dodged that pretty well. And if you're wondering if there's like any lasting effects, like if there was a fire one year, does it affect the grapes in the next year or from years to come? No, that's the good news. Is it's really the only effect is if the smoke itself is right in the fruit zone and gets absorbed by the fruit. And so no effects on the 2019. That's good news.
Perfect. Well, and Anne followed up with what about the 2020 fire? So maybe just a quick overview, because I know we probably need to get on to some other wines.
Yeah, so 2020, we weren't so lucky, right? We had some fires in August, and a lot of the fruit wasn't harvested. So the sort of the great divide in how much effect smoke has is between making white wines and red wines. So the smoke is absorbed by the skins. And if you're making a wine like white wine, where typically the juice doesn't spend a lot of time in contact with the skins, you have, if unless the grapes are like really, really smoked, and I mean really smoked, you're probably not going to see any effect. And so we've have enough time now from the 2020 vintage to see that all of our whites seem really beautiful and fresh. We've already bottled the 2020 Sauvignon Blanc. We're about to start bottling the 2020 Fumé Blanc, not having that contact with the skins, because we press the juice off the skins right away. And the only thing we did differently in 2020 with that pressing process is we went with lighter pressures so that we would minimize any potential extract out of the skins, and use some natural sort of in the juice, some yeast hulls. It's basically dead yeast. It's kind of their outer shell that has some absorbent properties that can absorb some volatile phenols. So those are kind of the things that we did to mitigate any chance of there being a problem. And then the reds is another story. We're fermenting on the skins. So if they absorbed a substantial amount of smoke, there's probably going to be some kind of impact there. But it really depends on how fresh the smoke was, how long it lasted. And really what we're seeing at this point with the 2020 reds is there's kind of this unique sort of spice character that's actually kind of really interesting. And we did choose to not pick most of our 2020 reds, so it's going to be a very short vintage. We're not going to produce all the wines. We already know that. Like we didn't even pick Pinot Noir in 2020. So, you know, that's the bad news, is there's no 2020 Pinot Noir coming from us, because Pinot Noir is one of those varieties that's more readily, the smoke is more readily evident. And so we chose to bypass that. So the jury's still out on the 2020 reds. We're kind of we've just finished malolactic fermentation with a lot of those. We're tasting those and assessing where they're at, and if we need to do anything to mitigate the smoke or not. And so it's an ongoing process.
Perfect. Well, it looks like there's some tasting that has been slowing down. So I think we should move on to a Zin would be the next one, correct?
We can't have any tasting slowing down. Come on. Yeah, our next wine is our 2018 Beeson Ranch Zinfandel. I've got that here in my glass, so I'm going to join you here with a little taste of that. So right before we get on these with these tasting, I always spend a little time sniffing the wines. I might not taste them all, but I at least get a good sniff. And this one I just really love because it's so Dry Creek Valley Zinfandel. It's got really nice sort of boysenberry and maybe even a little bit of cranberry sauce fruit, some nice spice. You know, like I get sort of a combination of things like cumin and allspice and maybe even a little cardamom. Things like that. So, and very much a characteristic of old vine vineyards as well. And then, just even a little hint of chocolate or even maybe a little espresso kind of in the finish, and very round and smooth. So, really nice wine. So this is from the Beeson Ranch, which has been a favorite of ours for many years. And it's at the southwest end of Dry Creek Valley in some hills that, kind of up where the western slopes start in Dry Creek Valley. And it's a very old vineyard. It's what, over 120 some years old. I forget exactly how old it is, but planted in the late 1800s. Here's a good overview shot of it, kind of from up of one of these hills, and you see the hill kind of going down to a lower level near West Dry Creek Road out there, and then there's another hill in the background there, kind of rising up again, and that's all Beeson Ranch. It kind of goes down and up again. I'm told that it used to be owned by the same property as the Madrona Manor, which is a really beautiful small inn and restaurant, really top-end restaurant, just a little bit south of there. And over the years, I guess pieces have been sold off and subdivided, so it's not part of the same property. But this is a beautiful old vine vineyard, and it's all dry farmed. You can see these vines are just amazing. They kind of become these living sculptures in and of themselves. They take on a lot of character over the years, and one of the some of the unique aspects of these old vine vineyards is often there are some other grape varieties mixed in with the Zinfandel. There's a lot of speculation about how or why that happened. I've never heard anyone, have a firsthand account from somebody back in the late 1800s saying why they did that. But I can only guess it, in some cases it was probably that's the vine you had to plant when one died and you replaced another. But, in other cases, I got to think it's sort of reflecting what people knew in Europe, where often wines were made from a multitude of grape varieties, not just a single one. So, they interspersed some of their other grape varieties in there. This is actually a fairly difficult vineyard to farm. It's partly because, although you can't really tell in these photos, some of the slopes are fairly steep. And so that's a little bit challenging if you're trying to get a tractor through there to do some disking or any of the work that you need to do in the vineyard. And the other thing is just the spacing. It was designed with horses and plows in mind, and horse-drawn plows, not with tractors and modern equipment. So I know the vineyard owners have had difficulty when they wanted to change vineyard managers in trying to find somebody who just had the equipment that could actually farm this vineyard. And so, and I've even heard some stories too about some near accidents with tractors getting a little bit away from the driver going down the hills and giving him a little bit of a wild ride. Fortunately, no, I haven't heard anyone roll a tractor, so that would be really bad news. So I talked about that mix of varieties. So some of the grape varieties that we find in this vineyard are things like Grenache, Mourvedre. There's an obscure red variety called Negrette, also known as Pinot St. George. Years ago, Christian Brothers Winery used to bottle a varietal Pinot St. George. It looks a lot like Zinfandel, a little bit lighter in color along the lines of Zinfandel. There's also some Petite Sirah mixed in there. And then the owners have a block of pure Petite Sirah as well. So, this 2018 vintage, I was looking back at what we did in the winemaking. There was 3 different picks. Typically on this vineyard, we'll start up at the top of one of the hills early on, or maybe both of the tops of the hills. And then maybe a little bit later, you do kind of the lower slope. And the last thing to get picked is usually the lowest elevation near the road. And so we had 3 different Zinfandel lots, part of the pick. For the 2018 vintage, and a separate pick of the Petite Sirah. So really 4 different lots to work with. And, we use a restrained amount of new oak in this as well. It spends about 12 to 15 days in the fermenter and just creates a really beautiful Dry Creek Zinfandel. I think I saw some questions coming in there, Sarah. Anything we should talk about with this one?
Yes, we have lots of questions. So I didn't want to interrupt you if you were going to start talking on things. So first one is from David. They're drinking the 2017 Beeson. So are there any noticeable differences between the 17 and the 18?
Yeah, the 2017 is probably, if you had them side by side, you'd probably find it a little bit bigger, richer wine because of that heat spell that I talked about near the end of August, beginning of September. And again, with a dry farm vineyard, they have even a little less defense against that. So what that did was dehydrate the fruit a little bit. So you got, a little bit less water, more concentration of the color and tannin and everything in there. So it's probably just you'd find it a little bit bigger wine than this 2018. And 2018 was a little cooler vintage. And produced some really beautifully balanced wines. I thought coming out of that vintage that maybe we were going to have some lighter wines, and I thought that about 2019 too. But the 2018s actually are plenty big enough, plenty rich enough, but they just have this beautiful balance and really kind of smooth and round wines. So that's kind of the differences between the two.
Perfect. And then Juan added at the end that he would like to know about the 2016 vintage, if you happen to remember that.
I'll try. So 2016 was a very, what I recall is one of those years you kind of wish for a lot as a winemaker, because there wasn't any super extremes and highs and lows and temperatures and anything really terrible to deal with. And I'd have to look back to make sure, but I kind of feel like the winter preceding it was maybe one of those rare winters where we actually got plenty of rain. And so that was really good too. And so, in character, probably the 2016 is somewhat similar to the 2018 in producing a very balanced, elegant wine. Might have a little more spice character to it, but yeah, I think somewhat similar.
Great. So you were mentioning that there's kind of a lot of different varietals planted in this particular vineyard. So would it be considered a field blend, or can you really call it a Zinfandel?
Yeah, so we do pick everything except there's a few white vines of Trousseau Gris, and I some people like mixing that. I prefer not to. I've played with doing that both ways in old vine vineyards before, and I prefer to use it all red. But yes, it is essentially a field blend because we do, within the block that we call Zinfandel, let's say it in quotes, we know there's some other varieties mixed in there. We pick it all together. It's basically picked based on location within the vineyard, because that's how we sample it. We'll carve that vineyard up when we're sampling into a bunch of different pieces and check all those samples separately, and that's how we harvest it. So whatever's in there, it goes in there. And I really like that idea that nature has a hand, because if there's more pounds on one vine in one year and less than another, that determines the blend. And it kind of takes, I don't know, just kind of it's some nice serendipity. Takes my hands out of it, and makes it interesting. Every vintage might be a little different.
Well, Jan, I was wondering, are all the vines head trained? And maybe you could explain kind of what that term means.
Yes. So the answer is no. Actually, the Petite Sirah is not head trained. It's barely got a trellis. It's a very primitive trellis, just a couple of wires and some posts. But that's a cordon trained vine. So the head trained is what you saw the photos of, where basically there's no wires, there's no trellis to help support the vine, and so the vine just has to stand on its own. And so the vine forms a short trunk, and then you kind of have these different arms sticking off of it, and sometimes it's sort of more of a goblet shape, sometimes they get to be more like a wagon wheel with spokes coming out, but over the years, like I said, each vine sort of takes on its own shape. And some of them are much bigger than others. Like one of the grape varieties we didn't talk about that I know is in this vineyard as well is Carignan. And, Carignan vines often, not always, but often are tall vines, so kind of stand tall above the other vines as well. So anyhow, that photo was head trained. And then, if you have the wires where you kind of have these arms, going out along the wires, that's what we call cordon trained, and that's what the Petite Sirah is like.
So you mentioned that, this is a single vineyard. This is our Beeson Ranch Zinfandel. Do you ever use any of this fruit in any of our other Zinfandels?
We do. We use it in the Old Vine Zinfandel blend. So our Old Vine Zinfandel blend is, it relies on multiple different vineyards. So there's Beeson Ranch, there's Forchini, there's Bucagnani. In more recent years, we had Kowalski until the owner threw in the towel and decided to stop farming. Unfortunately, it was a small but really beautiful old vine vineyard. So there's some others. Voganson Ranch, which we make a single vineyard bottling of, has a little bit older head trained block in there as well that we use sometimes. But yeah, the short answer is yes. It's used in the Old Vine Zinfandel, but that's it. Other than, I will say, we have on occasion done special lots for the Sonoma County Barrel Auction, which is kind of a wine trade driven auction. And that's just something fun to play with. Sometimes we'll do a mix. Like this coming year, we're doing a blend of Beeson Ranch and Voganson, because they're both in the Western Hills. So it's kind of a regional blend. Yeah.
And so I guess the aging explanation that you did for Chardonnay was very popular. So can you offer that up for Beeson as far as when will it peak? How long do you think it can age for? And is there a difference in the vintage that would affect that answer?
Yeah, so vintage would affect that for sure. Like I kind of suspect the 2017s, for example, might not age as well. That they're going to be, big and rich and showy in their first, few years. But 15 years from now, maybe it's starting to head downhill a little bit. But I've been wrong before. So I think this 2018 is, because it's a very balanced wine, is going to age pretty well. And I'm glancing down here to look at my notes about the pH, because I don't have that memorized. So it's got a 3.59 pH. That's for me, kind of, if I was going to say the ideal red wine pH for a wine, I'd make it be like 3.6 to 3.65, like maybe 3.65 if I had to pick a number. This is a little below that. It doesn't taste tart at all. It's really round, but to me that means it's going to set it up to age well. Red wines typically can age longer than whites, and at least to my taste. And so I think, this one, I would expect it to be really nice at 8 to 10 years of age for sure. I think it's still going to have some fresh fruit left, along with some of those secondary and tertiary aromas that you get with age. But 15 years, not out of the question. Obviously we have to have it in good temperature conditions, like 55 to 58 degrees, no fluctuations pretty much, and good humidity and everything. So Beyond 15, it's kind of just speculation. I don't know. This very well could be a wine that ages nicely up to 20, 25 years. We've seen that happen in our library tastings with Zinfandel, which people don't necessarily expect. They expect that with Cabernet or Bordeaux style reds, but sometimes they can age really nicely. So I think I've tried to hedge my bets there and not really commit to anything.
That was very good. Yes, now you sound like the marketing person instead of the winemaker. So we had one last question before. I know everyone's anxious to get onto the Petite Sirah, but what is the difference between French and Hungarian oak in terms of taste? And I would say first, Joe, you should have been at our barrel tasting last month, which is on YouTube if anybody ever needs to go back and look at our old tastings. But Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, where were you, Joe? No, so the short answer is the difference in taste between French or Hungarian oak is very little. And Hungarian is actually one piece of sort of what we've come to more broadly often call European oak. So France is definitely part of Europe, but they're France, so they think they're special, and they are. We like France a lot, but they're kind of their own thing, at least in their minds. And then European is all the other countries in France, right? So places like Hungary, Russia. There's Carpathian oak, which I think sort of maybe spans different countries. Honestly don't know exactly what countries that involves. Or Slovenia. We've tried some Slovenian oak barrels that were really nice. So French oak is two different oak species. It's white oak. It's a specific set of oak trees. You can't necessarily make a barrel out of just any oak tree. And then the other European oaks are one of those same species. So they have French and European have the same species in common. And so the flavors are very similar. And really when you start to get into differences between the two, it depends more on the cooperage and their style of how they toast and bend the wood and how they age the wood, even where they age the wood. So it's kind of more of a house style versus this overall difference between the regions. Basically, French oak, can have some really nice, nice vanilla and spice characteristics. And it really depends on the toasting and technique, which is kind of a whole story. Go back and look at the YouTube video and we'll talk about toasting and how much influence that has on the flavor in oak.
Perfect. And then a little tag along about American oak. What's the big noticeable difference? And then we'll move on to the Petite Sirah.
Yeah, so American oak is a different species of white oak. It is still white oak that we use, but it's a different species. And it does have, has tended anyway to have a little bit stronger flavor. So maybe a little less goes further kind of in terms of impact on the wine. I see less and less a difference though than there used to be between American oak and French oak. And I've even been fooled when I didn't know what type of oak it was. I could have imagined sometimes it's French oak. But American oak used to be characterized as having kind of almost sometimes a dill flavor to it, and it was mainly because years ago the cooperages in America, they were used to making whiskey barrels, which is a whole kind of different ball game. You don't air dry the wood for whiskey barrels necessarily, at least traditionally they haven't. You put it in a kiln, that affects the flavor instead of sitting it out in the sun and the rain for 2 or 3 years. And then, whiskey barrel, they put a really short, high char toast on the barrel. Whereas a wine barrel, we're using a much smaller fire and getting a nice slow toast and deeper penetration of the wood and caramelization of the wood, the natural wood sugars and all that stuff. So it's a very different process. And so a lot of that differences between American and European oaks, French oak, came from technique, I think. That's my opinion. And then over years, as American coopers have learned how to make wine barrels, those differences are much smaller.
Great. Well, then let's get on to the Petite Sirah.
All right. So this is also 2018 vintage. And this is our Spencer's Hill Petite Sirah. So this comes from an estate vineyard. The vineyard is at the what we call the Lytton Springs part of Dry Creek appellation. So it's kind of a southeast. And who's Spencer? Let's figure out that question right now. So Spencer is the son of Kim and Don Wallace, our fearless leaders, and he is well. The label of the wine says it's exuberantly expressive, like Spencer. So you know, he's matured a little bit. He's maybe slightly less exuberant than he used to be. He used to do something called parkour, and he'd be running around the winery and like trying to, you know, jump off of walls and roofs and things like that. We had to tell him to take it easy. We don't want your mom to get upset when you break a leg. But anyhow, he's off in Montana now too, living a good life and being an Orvis fly fishing guide, among other things. So yeah, and he's a great young man, very sparkling personality. And so, you know, we've named this wine after him. This is the vineyard. So you can see the hills here. This part of Dry Creek Valley has these beautiful rolling hills. A little bit, you know, not the iron-rich soil quite so much that we see in a lot of the other parts of the valley. There is some of that there, but less of that. But really beautiful, rocky, gravelly soil. And you know, we make the Spencer's Hills Zinfandel, and then there's Petite Sirah, and they're both grown in kind of immediate proximity to each other. And we really like you know, that this really beautiful rocky soil on this hillside, because it naturally sort of throttles down the grape. It doesn't. They're not super vigorous, the vines, so it kind of gives us a little bit less growth, maybe even a little less crop, but it concentrates what's there a little bit more. So you get more concentrated fruit from these well-drained rocky soils. It's a really key ingredient for red wines. And every time you hear me talking about red wines, I'm talking about rocky, well-drained soils, because that's where it's at. So this Petite Sirah is well, first of all, from this vineyard, it's one of our best Petite Sirah lots of every year. And that's why we make a bottling of it. And we use some of this in the Spencer's Hills Zinfandel blend. So the question might arise, well, do you go the other way? Do you use some of the Zinfandel in the Spencer's Hill Petite Sirah? And the answer is virtually no. This is one of the most straightforward wines we ever make. Every year, I feel obligated as a winemaker to try a blend with some Zinfandel in it. And, you know, 9 times out of 10, it's like, nope, I like the Petite Sirah on its own. It's just better if we're looking for Petite Sirah that way. But I'll never stop trying, because there might be that one year where a little bit of Zinfandel makes a difference and adds some little nice nuance to the blend. But what I like about this Petite Sirah is it's just got, you know, beautiful, rich fruit. And Petite Sirah as a grape has a reputation of being a big, you know, dark, tannic, you know, sometimes almost a brute, you know, that's kind of almost painful to drink. This is a shot of actually some of the key varieties in blending Zinfandel and associated varieties. So on your left there is, with the big round berries, is Alicante Boucher, which is one of those varieties that's often found mixed in some of those old vine vineyards. And we have some of it planted right in front of the winery. So it's just beautiful, dark juice. And in the middle is Zinfandel. And you can kind of see some of that natural variation of Zinfandel. You've got some really dark berries and some sort of lighter, not quite pink, but paler berries. And that's just a characteristic of Zinfandel, where within each cluster, there's somewhat uneven ripening. And then on the right is what we're drinking tonight. It's Petite Sirah. So it's somewhat similar in structure, the cluster, to Zinfandel, but typically is tighter. So the berries are packed together more tightly. It actually is more prone to rot, you know, to botrytis and you know, mold, basically. So you kind of have to watch it for that. But I love it. It's a beautiful variety, and I love getting to make a Petite Sirah on its own. So I was talking about, you know, Petite Sirah has this reputation for being a big, brutish wine, and part of that is the tannins. The tannins are you know, naturally occurring compounds in the grapes and the seeds of the grapes that you know, when a wine's young and if they're really high and level, they can really dry out your mouth, or, you know, even make it feel like, you know, a little bit sandpapery even. But I don't get that in this wine. I'm going to take a taste and make sure I'm right. So this wine has never been that brut. And I think part of it is definitely the vineyard. I think we just get really nice fruit there that is in balance. And the other part is how we handle the extraction, the fermentation, because those tannins are in the skins, they're in the seeds, and you can modify what you get out of the grapes by the different techniques you use during fermentation and by how long you leave the juice on the skins. And so by techniques, I'm talking about how, so all the skins have all the color and they float on top of the juice, and you have to somehow get them mixed back into the juice to get good color extraction and some of the tannins that you want, because that's part of what gives the mouthfeel to red wine. And so there's different ways you can do that. You can do hand punch downs. You can do, pump overs where you connect a pump to the bottom of the tank and circulate juice over the top. And then the pump overs, you can vary the amount of time. And you can use a gentle sprinkler, or you can have somebody standing there with a hose and kind of just, it's like a fire hose, blasting the juice and really mixing it up, or some combination of all that. There's different varying techniques. And so it really comes down to tasting the wine every day, paying attention to the tannin level, and knowing when to back off on the length of time or the number of pump overs per day, and when to press. And often with Petite Sirah, we won't be completely dry. It'll still be fermenting a little bit, and we press it off because we don't want to get too tannic. And so we want that nice balance. And so the other thing I'll just mention with this wine has more new oak than any of the wines we've tasted tonight. It's actually almost 37% new oak. But when you taste it, you don't taste a lot of wood. And that's part of the art of winemaking too, is knowing how much new oak to use. And a bigger wine like this, because it is a bigger, richer wine, can often handle more new oak, and sometimes benefits from it. That one of the benefits of new oak is kind of taking, that portion, so that 37% that we put in these new oak barrels probably has, if you tasted it next to an older barrel, the new oak barrel wines would have a little bit darker fruit, richer fruit. So it's, again, another flavor shaping ingredient or technique. And that's all.
We got a really interesting question about what kind of glasses should they be drinking these wines out of?
Whatever glass you have. That's my short answer. For better or for worse, I've got the exact same glass here for all three wines. I personally don't get too hung up on glass style or shape. I do like, this basic, nice sort of bowl shape, but not super round. I like kind of it, getting a little narrow at the top. So maybe it kind of helps concentrate those aromas when you're swirling a little bit, because smelling the wine is definitely part of the pleasure of it. I like a generous glass. Let's put it that way. I don't really like really tiny ones. I don't like the really sort of squattier round bowls. This is a really good shape for me. And I think it works for pretty much anything. People like Riedel or people that are making all these different glasses, they're going to tell you differently, and they may be right. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm good with one shape.
So Tim, Douglas was asking, he sent me a question that you probably haven't seen, asking if you have been influenced by any other classic Petite Sirah producers. He named Fabiano as one. And so has there been anyone that's kind of given you inspiration as you're working on Petite Sirah for us?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there's really two. Fabiano is definitely one. So years ago when I was, before I was a winemaker, and I was getting to know different varieties, including Petite Sirah, Fabiano was one that I really enjoyed. So it's interesting that you make that up or mention that, and they have a good reputation for Petite Sirah as well. The other is actually a winery I used to work for years ago, Freemark Abbey, and they made years ago a Petite Sirah from York Creek Vineyard in Napa Valley. So it was a hillside vineyard owned by Fritz Maytag, who later went on to open Anchor Brewing, so Anchor Steam Beer. But those were monsters. And actually they were too tannic. They really were. I mean, the tannin just never went away. But they were really fun to taste in library tastings because they would last pretty good long time, and they weren't exactly balanced. I think they could have. I always wished I had a chance to work with that fruit because I think I could have done it better, but they were really impressive wines. So those were kind of my two inspirations, and then and later, so we when I worked at Freemark Abbey, we weren't getting that York Creek fruit. We tried, but we couldn't get it out of the hands of the people. I think Ridge Winery had it by then, but we started making Petite Sirah again, and that was a really great learning experience for me. And I really found out that some age on the vines seemed to matter, at least this vineyard that we were working with, because it was okay for the first 3 vintages, but like year 4 and 5, man, it was a different wine, and it was much better.
So I know we need to wrap this up, but I'm sure everybody wants to know your take on aging for this wine, since that's been kind of the common thread throughout this.
Yeah, so I'd probably be sort of similar to what I said about the Zinfandel, like 8 to 10 years, but I might expand that to 12. So let's say 8 to 12 years for sure, I think should be really good for this one. Beyond that, it's actually got a really low pH. So again, 2018 vintage, really beautiful acid and pH. I think that sets it up well. And I wouldn't be surprised, if you could go to 15, 20 years with this one. I think that's possible, but a good 12 years, I'll bet this wine would be beautiful.
Great. And Nick snuck an extra question in there. Why is Syrah with a Y sometimes?
People just, there's been some people that for whatever reason spell it differently. I've always been told that the proper way is Sirah for the Syrah portion. And I do think, some people, maybe have spelled it like Syrah, like the grape variety, which is not Petite Sirah, but just Syrah. And maybe they have a little confusion. I don't know. But Petite Sirah is one of those too that just, you get all kinds of spellings, especially from the vineyard guys, and they'll call it Petite Sirah or, pet or whatever. I mean, it's just all different kinds of things. But it's a great grape.
Perfect. Well, that will wrap us up for tonight, but I know that I see a lot of club members' faces here, which is phenomenal. If you aren't a club member, this is actually a very typical example of one of our club shipments. So if you've been thinking about joining and wondering what the wines are like, this is a great example of them. So just let us know if we can answer any questions. Upcoming tastings, we have April 22nd. That is our olive oil and honey tasting. And that is our estate olive oil and our I would say estate honey. I don't know if there's a such thing as estate honey, but the bees are on our estate property. So we'll call it estate honey. And that is going to be with our second generation owner, Don Wallace, which is wonderful. And then we just snuck another virtual tasting up on the calendar. So you probably haven't even heard about it. It is on May 20th. And we are going to be doing the Terroir series. So all 3 of the Terroir series wines. And if you're familiar with our club schedule, it's very rare that all 3 of those wines are actually available at the same time. So this is actually a really incredible opportunity to taste through all 3 of those wines with Tim. So very much looking forward to that. It's on the website now, so go ahead and sneak in and get your reservation before we advertise it to everyone else. Well, thank you again so much. It's so great to see all your faces. We are back open for tastings for outdoor. So if you are able to come and see us anytime in near or far future, we would love to see you in person. Otherwise, keep tuning in, keep seeing us virtually. Just keep sending us your love. We'll see you guys, on social and every other which way. Every comment means so much to us. So thank you so much for being here tonight. Tim, do you have any final words?
Yeah, just thank you for all the good questions and for being here. I hope you can tell this actually really energizes me. I love doing this. I love a chance to talk about the wines and share them with you guys. And, I'm feeling the love too. So great. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night. We'll see you soon.